At 15, I was kicked out into a blizzard because my sister planted drugs in my backpack. My father, a man of God, looked at me and said I was dead to him. He slammed the door, leaving me to freeze. 17 years later, he called me back. Not to apologize, but because that same sister needs my liver to survive. He thinks I am coming home to save her. He has no idea that I am coming home to foreclose on his church and burn his legacy to the ground. Before I tell you how I destroyed my family in 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat who became the wolf. I am Kamara, 32 years old, and my time costs $5,000 a minute. I checked the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist and sighed. The man sitting across from me in my Chicago penthouse was sweating through his Italian suit. He was the CEO of a Fortune 500 tech company, and he was currently trying to explain why he had embezzled $3 million. I did not care about his excuses. I slid a single sheet of paper across the marble table. Sign the resignation letter, Arthur. You have 30 seconds before I release the audit report to the press. He signed. His hand was shaking so badly he nearly tore the paper. That is what I do. I am a corporate fixer. I clean up messes for the ultra-wealthy and I remove problems. I never expected that my next job would involve removing my own family. My phone vibrated against the glass table. The screen displayed a name I had not seen in nearly 2 decades. Mother. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I did not say hello. I simply listened. Kamara. Thank God you answered. My mother. Betty was crying. Her voice sounded exactly as weak and pathetic as I remembered. It is Jasmine. She is dying, Kamara. Her liver is failing. The doctors say she has weeks. You are the only match. We need you to come home. I took a sip of my $2,000 vintage wine. I felt absolutely nothing. No sadness, no panic, just a cold detachment. Tell Jasmine I hope she made peace with God, I said calmly, because she is not getting anything from me. I was about to hang up when my other phone rang. It was the only person in the world I trusted. My lawyer, Sterling. I put my mother on hold. Do not hang up on them, Kamara Sterling said immediately. His voice was sharp. I just got an alert from the county clerk office in Atlanta. Your father Otis is trying to sell the land. I frowned. What land? Your grandmother estate, Sterling replied. The 10 acres behind the old house. The deed is still technically in probate, but Otis forged a preliminary sale agreement. He is selling it to a developer called Preston Vance. I froze. Preston Vance? That was Jasmine's husband. My brother-in-law. The white man from a failing old money family who looked at black women like we were accessories. He is trying to sell my inheritance to my sister husband for pennies on the dollar to pay off his gambling debts, Sterling continued. If you do not go down there and assert your rights within 48 hours, you lose the land. And Kamara, that land is now zoned for commercial use. It is worth $12 million. I looked at the Chicago skyline glittering outside my window. I switched back to the call with my mother. Her sobbing had turned into hiccups. I will be there tomorrow, I said. Oh, thank you, Jesus, she wept. Thank you for saving your sister. I hung up. I was not going back to save Jasmine. I looked at my assistant who was standing quietly in the corner. Prepare the jet, I told him, and open the file labeled Snowstorm. We are going to flatten that house. The flight to Atlanta took 2 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time. The private car dropped me off at the bottom of the long driveway. I told the driver to wait. I wanted to walk up. I wanted to see the kingdom my father claimed was so holy. The house was a disaster. The white paint was peeling. The gutters were hanging loose. The majestic lawn where we used to have church picnics was overgrown with weeds. It smelled of decay and neglect. This was what happened when you focused on appearance rather than substance. I walked up the porch steps. My Louboutin heels clicked loudly on the rotting wood. Before I could knock, the door swung open. A tall white man stood there. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight and boat shoes that had seen better days. It was Preston. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my simple black dress. He did not see the quality of the fabric or the cut. He only saw a black woman standing at the service entrance. Finally, the agency sent someone. Preston huffed. He turned around and grabbed a heavy leather suitcase from the hallway floor. He shoved it toward me. Here, take this up to the master bedroom. And be careful with it. That bag is Louis Vuitton. It is worth more than your life. I stood there staring at him. He thought I was the help. He thought I was the nurse they hired for Jasmine. Well, what are you waiting for? Preston snapped, snapping his fingers in front of my face. Move it. I need a scotch. Make sure it is single malt. I took the bag. It was heavy. I looked at the handle. The stitching was uneven. The logo was slightly off-center. It was a fake, a cheap knockoff just like him. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Certainly, sir. I lifted the bag and walked into the foyer. Preston turned his back to me, heading toward the living room. When he was 3 steps away, I opened my hand. Gravity did the rest. The suitcase crashed onto the hardwood floor with a thunderous boom. It sounded like a gunshot. The cheap latch broke instantly, spilling clothes and toiletries everywhere. A bottle of cologne shattered, soaking a pile of white shirts. Preston spun around, his face turning red. Are you insane, you stupid incompetent? I stepped over the mess, my heels crunching on the broken glass. I walked right up to him until I was inches from his face. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. Oops, I whispered. My hand slipped. And Preston, that bag is a fake. You can tell by the stitching. Next time, buy the real thing. It lasts longer. Preston's mouth fell open. He looked at me, realizing for the first time that I was not wearing a uniform. He realized he didn't know who I was. Who the hell are you? He stammered. Before I could answer, a booming voice echoed from the kitchen. Preston, stop yelling at the help. We need peace in this house. My father walked in. Otis. He looked older. His hair was gray and his belly pushed against his shirt buttons, but his eyes were the same. Cold, judgmental, selfish. He saw me and stopped. There was no joy in his face, no fatherly love. He didn't even hug me. He just looked at his watch. You are late, he said gruffly. Your mother is upstairs changing Jasmine sheets. The kitchen is that way. Make some porridge. Your sister is hungry and she needs strength before the surgery. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat. It was a bitter, sharp thing. 17 years. I had built an empire. I had fired CEOs. I owned buildings in 3 different cities. And to him I was still just the servant girl, the scapegoat. I am not here to cook, Otis, I said. My voice was steady, level. Otis narrowed his eyes. Do not start with that attitude, Kamara. You are here to do a duty. God has given you a chance to redeem yourself for the sins of your youth. Now go to the kitchen. I walked past him. I did not go to the kitchen. I walked to the fireplace mantel where the family photos were displayed. There was Jasmine winning a beauty pageant, Jasmine graduating high school, Jasmine and Preston at their wedding. And there in the corner was the family portrait we took when I was 14. I picked it up. The glass was dusty. I looked at the spot where I should have been standing. My face had been cut out. In its place, someone had carefully pasted a photo of a golden retriever. My heart turned to ice. They had literally replaced me with a dog. Otis stepped up behind me, his heavy hand gripping my shoulder. Put that down. That is for family. You lost your place in this family the night you brought drugs into my house. I turned around slowly and looked him dead in the eye. I shrugged his hand off my shoulder as if it were a piece of lint. I didn't bring drugs into this house, Otis, I said softly. And I didn't come back to join your family. I came back to buy it. I dropped the photo frame. It shattered on the floor right next to Preston's fake luggage. Now where is my room? I expect fresh sheets. And tell Preston to clean up this mess. I am allergic to cheap cologne. I walked up the grand staircase that I had not set foot on in 17 years. Every step creaked under my heels, a sound that reminded me of sneaking out at night to avoid my father's temper. The hallway was lined with accolades. Jasmine's cheerleading trophies, Jasmine's beauty pageant sashes, Jasmine's diploma from the community college she dropped out of after one semester. There was not a single trace that I had ever lived in this house. It was as if I had been erased from existence long before I was kicked out into the snow. I reached the door to the master suite. Jasmine had taken over our parents' old room, of course. She always got the best of everything. I paused for a moment, steeling myself. I took a deep breath, expecting the smell of sickness, of medicine, of death. Instead, I smelled something cloyingly sweet. Vanilla and strawberries. I pushed the door open. The room was dim, illuminated only by a ring light set up in the corner, casting a soft, flattering glow toward the four-poster bed. And there she was. Jasmine, my sister. The golden child. She was propped up against a mountain of white silk pillows. She was wearing a lace nightgown that looked brand new. Her hair was perfectly brushed, fanned out around her head like a halo. But her face was a masterpiece of deception. I could see the contouring powder she had used to hollow out her cheeks. I could see the pale foundation she had applied to wash out her natural complexion. She didn't look like a dying woman. She looked like an actress preparing for the role of a dying woman. "Kamara," she whispered. Her voice was breathy and weak, a stark contrast to the screeching tone I remembered from our youth. "You came. I knew you would come." I walked into the room but stopped at the foot of the bed. I did not sit down. I did not reach for her hand. I just watched her perform. "Hello, Jasmine," I said, keeping my voice flat. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling theatrically. "Please come closer. I want to see you. It has been so long. I am so sorry, Kamara, for everything, for the years we lost. I lay here every night praying that God would bring you back so we could be a family again before I go." I took a step closer, but not out of affection. I stepped closer because my eyes had caught something. The room was stuffy, the windows sealed shut. The air freshener plugged into the wall was working overtime, pumping out that vanilla scent. But underneath it, there was a sharp metallic tang that I recognized from my college years. And something else. A fruity, chemical odor. I looked at the nightstand. It was covered in Bible verses and empty medicine bottles that were turned so the labels faced outward. Very staged. But then I looked down at the floor. Just barely visible under the lace dust ruffle of the bed, there was a glint of glass. It was tucked away, hidden in the shadows. I shifted my position slightly. It was a bottle of vodka, cheap vodka. And it was empty. My eyes moved to the trash can by the vanity. Buried under a pile of tissues was a small, colorful cylinder, a disposable vape pen, strawberry-flavored. I looked back at Jasmine. She was dabbing a dry eye with a tissue, sniffling loudly. "The doctors say it is a tragedy." Jasmine sighed, clutching her chest. "An autoimmune disease. My body is attacking itself. It is just bad luck, Kamara. I have lived such a clean life. I go to church. I pray. Why is God testing me like this?" I felt a cold rage building in my chest. Autoimmune disease. That was the lie she was selling. That was the story she told the church to get donations. But I knew what I was looking at. The yellowing of her eyes wasn't from bad luck. The tremor in her hands wasn't from weakness. It was withdrawal. She wasn't sick because of her genetics. She was sick because she had spent the last decade drinking her life away on her parents' dime, and now that her liver was failing, she wanted mine to replace it. "It must be hard," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm that she completely missed, "to be so innocent and yet suffer so much." "It is," Jasmine nodded eagerly. "But God provides. He brought you back." She sat up a little straighter, abandoning the weak act for a moment as she got to the point. "Kamara, the doctors ran some simulations. They say that because we are sisters, Because we share the same blood, the compatibility is incredible. 99%. It is almost unheard of. It is a sign. God designed you for this moment. He saved you from that snowstorm years ago so you could save me today. I stared at her. 99% compatibility. That was a very specific number. A number you could only know if you had run advanced genetic markers. Markers that required blood samples. Markers that required a full medical history. I had not given a blood sample in this state in 17 years. How do you know that, Jasmine? I asked quietly. She froze. Her eyes darted to the left, then back to me. What do you mean? How do you know we are a 99% match? I haven't seen a doctor here. I haven't signed a release form. I haven't given a drop of blood. So how does your doctor know my genetic markers? Jasmine stammered, her pale makeup cracking as she frowned. Well, Mom said, we are sisters. It is obvious. No, it is not obvious. I cut her off. You need my HLA tissue typing. You need my blood type. You need my antigen profile. Those are private medical records, records that are stored in a secure database in Chicago where I live. I leaned over the bed, placing my hands on the mattress looming over her. The smell of stale alcohol wafted off her skin, cutting through the vanilla perfume. Did you steal my medical records, Jasmine? Or did Preston pay someone to hack into the hospital database? Jasmine pulled the covers up to her chin, her eyes widening. You are being paranoid. We just want to save my life. Why are you so selfish? I am your sister. God orchestrated this. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. God didn't orchestrate this, Jasmine. And God didn't put that empty bottle of vodka under your bed. Jasmine's face went from pale to beet red in a second. She gasped. You are seeing things that is old. I stood up straight, brushing invisible dust off my dress. You are not sick from bad luck, Jasmine. You are sick because you are an alcoholic who refuses to take responsibility. And now you want to cut me open to fix your mistakes? Jasmine's face twisted. The sweet, dying sister vanished. In her place was the mean girl who used to lock me in the basement. You owe me, she hissed, her voice strong and venomous. You have everything. You have money. You have the career. You have the life I deserved. I stayed here. I took care of Mom and Dad. I sacrificed my dreams. You owe me this liver. There it was, the truth. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob and looked back at her. I don't owe you a thing, Jasmine. And just so you know, obtaining medical records without consent is a federal crime. Tell your husband, I hope he looks good in handcuffs. I slammed the door shut, drowning out her scream of rage. I walked down the hall, taking out my phone. I dialed Sterling. Sterling, I said as I descended the stairs. Add hacking and medical identity theft to the list, and get a private investigator to check the trash cans behind the house. We are going to need proof of the alcohol bottles before the garbage truck comes tomorrow morning. The smell of vanilla in Jasmine's room faded away, replaced instantly by the memory of wet wool and ozone. I closed my eyes, and the warmth of the hallway evaporated. Suddenly, I was 15 years old again, standing in the foyer of this very house, but the air was freezing. It was the night of the blizzard of 2007. The worst snowstorm Atlanta had seen in decades. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes like a wild animal trying to break in. But the storm inside the house was far more dangerous. 2 police officers stood in the entryway, shaking snow off their heavy coats. Their radios crackled with static. My father, Otis, stood by the staircase, his face a mask of stone. My mother, Betty, was wringing her hands by the kitchen door. And Jasmine, who was 18, then sat on the velvet sofa, sobbing into a handkerchief. One of the officers held up a clear plastic bag. Inside were jagged crystals that caught the light of the chandelier. Methamphetamine, enough to be considered intent to distribute. We found this in the backpack labeled Kamara Sterling, the officer said, his voice flat and tired. It was tucked in the side pocket, wrapped in a gym sock. I shook my head violently, my braids whipping around my face. That is not mine, I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. I have never seen that before. I swear to God, Daddy, I don't know how it got there. I looked at Jasmine. I begged her with my eyes to speak up. Earlier that day, she had borrowed my backpack because the strap on her designer purse had snapped. She had taken it to meet her boyfriend, the one who always parked his beat-up sedan 2 blocks away. The one who smelled like chemicals and burnt plastic. Jasmine looked up from her handkerchief. Her eyes were red but dry. I told you, Kamara. She whispered, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. I told you to stop hanging out with those bad kids at the arcade. I told Mom you were hiding things. Why would you do this to us? The betrayal hit me harder than a physical blow. My mouth fell open. Jasmine was lying. She was framing me to save herself. The officer looked at my father. Deacon Sterling. We know you are a pillar of this community. We can take her down to the station, but given her age and the weather, we can release her into your custody pending a hearing. But you need to handle this. I will handle it, Otis said. His voice was deeper than the thunder rolling outside. Leave us. The officers nodded and left, closing the heavy oak door. The moment the latch clicked, my father turned to me. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not ask if I was innocent. He only cared about one thing. Do you know who I am? He roared, stepping closer until he towered over me. I am the head deacon. I am a man of God, and I will not have a drug dealer living under my roof dragging my name through the mud. Daddy, please! I cried, tears streaming down my face. Jasmine used my bag. Check her room. Please just listen to me. Do not say her name, Otis shouted, striking the banister with his fist. Your sister is a saint. She is going to college. She is pure. You. You have always been the difficult one. The dark cloud over this family. I knew there was evil in you, Kamara. I saw it the day you were born. He grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron, bruising my skin through my thin sweater. He dragged me toward the front door. Otis! What are you doing? My mother cried out, taking a half step forward. It is 5 degrees below zero out there. He is casting out the devil, Otis spat. He opened the front door. The wind shrieked, blasting snow into the warm house. Get out, he yelled, shoving me. I stumbled, falling hard onto the icy porch steps. The cold bit into my skin like 1,000 needles. I was wearing only jeans and a sweater. No coat, no boots, just sneakers. Daddy, please, I will freeze, I screamed, scrambling to my knees. I do not have a daughter named Kamara, Otis said, looking down at me with eyes devoid of any love. My daughter is dead to me. Do not come back. Do not call. If I see you near this house again, I will call the police and tell them you broke in. He slammed the door. The sound echoed in the emptiness of the night. Then I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Click. I stood up, shivering violently. The snow was falling so fast I could barely see the street. I hammered on the door with my frozen fists. Mom, please let me in. I didn't do it. I backed away from the porch, looking up at the living room window. The warm yellow light spilled out onto the snow. I saw a silhouette move the curtain. It was my mother. Our eyes met through the glass. She saw me hugging myself, shivering in the deadly cold. She saw her 15-year-old child facing death. I waited for her to run to the door. I waited for her to choose me. Instead, she looked at me for one long second. Then she slowly reached up and pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut. The light vanished. She chose her comfort. She chose her husband. She chose the lie. I turned around and walked into the darkness alone. The memory released me. I gasped, sucking in the air of the present day. I was back in the hallway holding the phone. My knuckles were white. I walked down the stairs. Otis was still standing in the kitchen holding a glass of water, looking self-righteous. He looked up as I entered. Did you talk to your sister? He asked impatiently. Is she calm? When can we schedule the surgery? I walked right up to him. I was taller now in my heels. I was not the shivering girl in sneakers anymore. I was a shark in a $2,000 dress. I looked him dead in the eye. Do you remember that night, Otis? I asked, my voice soft and dangerous. The night of the blizzard. Otis frowned, confused by the change of subject. That was a long time ago. We have forgiven you for that. We are moving forward. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, just as he had invaded mine 17 years ago. You said I was dead to you, I whispered, letting the words hang in the air between us. You looked at me shivering in the snow, and you said your daughter was dead. You slammed the door and left me to freeze. Otis shifted uncomfortably, looking away. I did what I had to do to protect this family. It was a lesson. And look, you survived. You are successful now. It made you strong. I laughed. A cold, sharp sound. It didn't make me strong, Otis. It made me indifferent. I leaned in close so he could hear the ice in my voice. You said I was dead. So tell me, Deacon, why are you asking a ghost for a liver? Ghosts don't have organs, and ghosts don't give donations. Otis' face turned pale. So no. I continued, backing away toward the door. I am not giving her anything. But don't worry, I am not leaving yet. I have a meeting tomorrow morning with the City Zoning Commission about this house. Since I am a ghost, I thought I would haunt you for a little while. I turned on my heel and walked out to the porch, leaving him standing in the silence of his crumbling kingdom. The air outside was warm, but inside that house, it was finally starting to freeze. I stepped out of the kitchen, leaving my father alone in his misery. The hallway was dark. Shadows stretched long and thin across the peeling wallpaper, like grasping fingers trying to hold the house together. I could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the loose window frames. It was the sound of decay. I headed toward the guest room, where I had left my luggage. I just wanted to close the door, lock it, and make a few phone calls to my team in New York. I needed to accelerate the foreclosure process. But as I rounded the corner near the library, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking my path. It was Preston. He had changed out of his messy clothes into a fresh linen suit, but he still looked disheveled. His face was flushed with drink, and his eyes had a glazed, frantic look to them. He leaned against the doorframe, trying to look casual, trying to look like the lord of the manor. But I saw him for what he was. A desperate man standing on a sinking ship. Going somewhere, Kamara? He asked, his voice thick with false charm. I stopped, keeping a safe distance. I did not want his cheap cologne anywhere near me. I am going to bed, Preston. Move. He did not move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He tapped it against his palm, a slow, rhythmic sound in the quiet hallway. You know I have been thinking about you, he said, taking a step closer. It must be hard coming back here, seeing how well we are doing, seeing the life you could have had if you had just followed the rules. I almost laughed out loud. How well they were doing. The house was literally rotting around us, but his delusion was structural. It was load-bearing. If he admitted the truth, the whole roof would collapse on his head. What do you want, Preston? I asked, checking my watch. My time is expensive. He chuckled, shaking his head. Always the hustler. I respect that. Look, I know why you are really here. You are not here for family. You are here because you are broke. He opened the checkbook and uncapped a gold pen. Mom told me you are doing some freelance consulting work in Chicago, he said, sneering at the word freelance. We all know what that means. It means unemployed. It means you are living gig to gig, probably barely making rent. He scribbled something on the check, ripped it out with a flourish, and held it out to me. $50,000, he said. I looked at the piece of paper. It trembled slightly in his hand. Take it, he urged, pushing it toward my chest. Consider it reparations, compensation for your tragic childhood, or a down payment on a new life. All you have to do is sign the consent forms tomorrow. Give Jasmine the liver, take the money, and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. I stared at the check. $50,000. It was a lot of money to most people. To Preston, it was probably the last of his liquidity. To me, it was what I spent on a weekend trip to the Maldives. I reached out and took the check. Preston smiled a smug, satisfied grin. He thought he had won. He thought everyone had a price, and that mine was cheap. Smart girl, he said. I knew you would be reasonable. Cash it quickly, though. I move money around often for investments. I held the check up to the dim light. I looked at the signature. It was shaky. You know, Preston, I said, keeping my voice low and conversational. I have a rule about business. Always do your due diligence on the counterparty. Preston's smile faltered slightly. What are you talking about? I folded the check neatly in half. Then in half again. I am talking about Vance Industries, I said. Preston went rigid. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had seen a ghost. I continued, my voice smooth and cold. I read the financial news, Preston. I have a Bloomberg terminal in my office. I saw the alert come across the wire at 8 this morning. Vance Industries filed for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy protection in Delaware. Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You are not moving money around for investments, I said, stepping closer to him until I was looking down at him. You are hiding assets from your creditors. You are liquidating whatever cash you have left before the courts freeze your accounts. This check is not a gift, it is a crime. Preston backed up, hitting the wall. He looked like a trapped animal. That is a lie, he hissed, but his eyes were full of terror. We are restructuring. It is standard business strategy. You do not know what you are talking about. I reached out and tucked the folded check into the breast pocket of his linen suit. I patted it gently. Keep it, Preston, I whispered. You are going to need every penny. Diapers are expensive, and babies need to eat even when their father is in federal prison for bankruptcy fraud. I turned to walk away, but Preston's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was hard, painful. The mask of the gentleman was gone. You listen to me, you little witch, he snarled, pulling me back. You think you are so smart. You think you can come into my house and threaten me. I did not struggle. I did not scream. I just looked at his hand on my wrist, then up at his eyes. My expression was bored. Let go, Preston, I said calmly, or I will add assault to the list of charges. And trust me, my lawyers are much better than yours. He squeezed tighter, his face twisting with rage. You are going to give that liver, he spat. One way or another, you will sign those papers, you will save my wife, and you will keep your mouth shut about my business, or you will regret ever coming back to Atlanta. Do you understand me? I looked at him, and for the first time I felt a flicker of pity. Not for him, but for the sheer magnitude of his stupidity. He was threatening a shark while standing in deep water. I understand perfectly, Preston, I said. I used my free hand to peel his fingers off my wrist one by one. He was strong, but he was shaking too much to hold on. But you should know one thing, I said, smoothing out my sleeve. I did not come back to save your wife, and I certainly did not come back to save you. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. I came back to foreclose. I walked away down the hall, leaving him standing there in the dark, clutching his chest, where the worthless check burned a hole in his pocket. I could hear his heavy breathing behind me, fast and panicked. He knew I knew, and he knew that for $50,000 he had just bought himself a war he could not win. The air conditioning in the First Baptist Church had been broken since I was 12 years old. Sitting in the second pew wearing a black silk dress that cost more than the entire building renovation fund, I realized some things never changed. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of peppermint candies, stale perfume, and sweat. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of judgment. My father Otis stood behind the pulpit, wiping his forehead with a white handkerchief. He was in his element. This was his kingdom. At home, he was a man with gambling debts and a crumbling house, but here he was the head deacon. Here he was the voice of God. I looked around the sanctuary. It was packed. Every pew was filled with people fanning themselves with paper fans printed with the face of Jesus. In the front row across from me sat Jasmine in a wheelchair. She was wearing a pale blue dress and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over her face. She looked like a fragile doll. Beside her, Preston sat with his head bowed, playing the role of the devoted, suffering husband perfectly. I checked my watch. I had only agreed to come because my lawyer Sterling told me it would look good for the upcoming legal battle if I appeared to be trying to reconcile. But now, feeling the eyes of 500 people boring into my back, I realized I had walked into a trap. Otis gripped the wooden edges of the pulpit. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a low rumble that shook the floorboards. "Brothers and sisters," he began. "We talk often about sacrifice. We talk about the blood of the Lamb. But what does sacrifice look like in the modern world?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. A woman in the back shouted, "Amen." "It looks like forgiveness," Otis roared suddenly, his voice rising. "It looks like the return of the prodigal child." My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going. I tried to catch my mother's eye. Betty was sitting next to me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She refused to look at me. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw set in a rigid line. "For years our family has carried a heavy burden," Otis continued, pacing the stage. "We lost a daughter to the cold world, to the streets, to sin." I clenched my teeth. He was rewriting history in real time. He was not telling them he kicked me out. He was telling them I ran away. "But God is a God of restoration," Otis shouted, raising his hands to the ceiling. "Hallelujah," the crowd responded. "And today I stand before you with a heart full of joy, because the lost sheep has returned." Otis pointed a shaking finger directly at me. 500 heads turned. The weight of their attention felt physical, like a heavy blanket thrown over my head. "Stand up," Kamara Otis commanded. I did not want to stand. I wanted to walk out. But if I walked out now, I would be the villain they all thought I was. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling stiff. "Look at her," Otis said, his voice cracking with fake emotion. "She has come back to us not just to reconcile, but to give a gift of life. As many of you know, my beloved Jasmine is sick. She is fighting a battle that no young mother should have to fight." Preston reached over and held Jasmine's hand. Jasmine dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A collective sigh of sympathy swept through the room. But yesterday, Otis boomed. Yesterday, a miracle happened. My daughter Kamara came to me and said, "Daddy, I want to save my sister. I want to give her a part of myself." My blood ran cold. The room started to spin. I had never said that. I had explicitly refused. "Ladies and gentlemen," Otis announced, his voice triumphant, "Kamara has agreed to be a living liver donor for her sister. She is going to lay down her body to save her family. That is the power of redemption. That is the power of God, love." The church erupted. It was not just applause, it was a roar. People jumped to their feet. The organist hit a high chord. The choir started clapping. "Praise God," a woman behind me shouted, grabbing my shoulder and shaking me. "Bless you, child," an old man in the front row cried out, wiping tears from his eyes. I stood there frozen in the center of the noise. It was an ambush, a public execution of my free will. He knew I could not say no in front of the entire town. He knew that if I denied it now, I would look like a monster who wanted her sister to die. I looked at Otis. He was smiling at me. It was not a smile of pride. It was a smile of victory. He had checkmated me. Panic rose in my chest. I looked at the smiling faces around me. They were crying happy tears for a lie. They were celebrating my mutilation. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Sister Patterson, the head of the church usher board. She was a large woman with a grip like steel. "The Lord has washed you clean, baby," she shouted over the noise, pulling me into a suffocating hug. "You are doing the Lord work." "No," I whispered. I pulled away from her. The applause was deafening. I looked toward the pulpit. Otis was basking in the glory, accepting handshakes from the other deacons. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was not the scared 15-year-old girl anymore. I was a corporate fixer. I destroyed CEOs for breakfast. I was not going to let this old man sell my organs for social clout. I stepped out into the aisle. Otis saw me move. His smile faltered slightly. I walked toward the front. I was not walking toward him to hug him. I was walking toward the microphone stand that had been set up for the solo singer. I am going to tell them I thought. I am going to tell them everything. The bankruptcy, the alcohol, the lies. I reached the front row. I saw the fear flash in Preston's eyes. He knew what I was capable of. I reached for the microphone stand. My hand closed around the cold metal. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my wrist. It was wet with sweat and trembling. I looked down. It was my mother. Betty. She had moved faster than I thought possible. She gripped my wrist, dragging my hand away from the microphone. "Come with me," she said loudly, her voice straining to sound cheerful for the audience. "The spirit is just too much for her. She needs some water." She pulled me hard. I stumbled. To the congregation, it looked like I was overcome with emotion. They clapped louder. "Hallelujah, she is overwhelmed," the organist shouted into his mic. "Let me go!" I hissed, trying to wrench my arm free. My mother did not let go. She dug her fingernails into my skin just like she had when I was a child. She dragged me past the choir stand, past the smiling deacons, and through the heavy velvet curtains that led to the back office. The moment the curtains closed, the noise of the sanctuary was muffled. The air was suddenly cooler. My mother shoved me. I stumbled back, hitting the wall hard. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed. Her face was unrecognizable. The sweet, submissive wife was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes full of desperate rage. "I am going to tell them the truth," I said, straightening my dress. "I am going to tell them that Otis is a liar. I never agreed to this." "You will do no such thing," Betty snapped, stepping into my personal space. She pointed a finger in my face. "Look at them out there, Kamara. Look at how they love you right now. For the first time in your life, you are a hero. You are the good daughter." "I don't want to be a hero," I shouted. "I want to keep my liver. I want you to stop lying." "It is too late for that," Betty said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "Your father just announced it. It is done. The prayer chains have started. The whole town knows. So what?" I challenged. "Let them know it is a lie." Betty laughed. It was a dry, terrible sound. "If you go back out there and tell them you won't save your dying sister, do you know what will happen? They won't think you are honest. They will think you are the devil." She grabbed the lapels of my expensive jacket and pulled me down to her level. "This town runs on reputation, Kamara. Your father is a leader here. If you make him a liar in his own church, you destroy him. And if you refuse to save Jasmine after this—" She paused, letting the threat hang in the stagnant air of the back room. "If you refuse now, you won't just be the girl who ran away. You will be a pariah. No one will do business with you. No one will sell you gas. No one will look you in the eye. They will spit on you in the street." I stared at her. This was my mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me. She was threatening me with social annihilation to cover up her husband's lies. "Is that what you care about?" I whispered. "What the neighbors think?" "I care about survival," Betty said, releasing me and smoothing her skirt. "We have to live here, Kamara. You can fly back to your fancy tower in Chicago, but we have to live here." She reached for the door handle to go back out to the applause. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "So you have a choice. You can go out there, smile, and be the saint they think you are. Or you can tell the truth and watch this whole town tear you apart piece by piece. Now fix your face. We have a miracle to sell." St. Jude Private Medical Center did not smell like a hospital. It smelled like money. The floors were Italian marble, and the air was scented with eucalyptus rather than antiseptic. There were no crying babies or crowded waiting rooms here. This was where the elite of Atlanta came to fix their bodies and hide their secrets. I walked down the pristine hallway flanked by Preston and my mother. Preston was walking with a bounce in his step. He thought he had won. He thought the check he gave me and the pressure from the church had finally broken me. He had no idea that I was walking into the lion den solely to pull its teeth out. We stopped in front of a heavy oak door with a gold plaque. Dr. Harrison Thorne, Chief of Surgery. Preston knocked and opened the door without waiting. Dr. Thorne was sitting behind a mahogany desk that looked expensive enough to feed a family of 4 for a year. He was a small man with nervous eyes and hands that were too smooth. I knew him. Or rather, I knew of him. My background check revealed he had 3 malpractice suits settled out of court and a gambling debt almost as large as my father. It made sense that he and Preston were friends. Birds of a feather flocked together even in the sewer. "Ah, Preston," Dr. Thorne said, standing up and smoothing his white coat. "And this must be the donor." "I am Kamara," I said, extending my hand. I did not smile. Dr. Thorne took my hand. His skin was cold and clammy. "Excellent," he said. "Please have a seat. We need to run some preliminary tests. Blood work, cardiac stress test, and a psychological evaluation. Just standard procedure to ensure you are fit for surgery." I sat down, crossing my legs. I played the part of the nervous, submissive sister perfectly. I let my shoulders slump slightly. I kept my eyes on the floor. "Is it going to hurt?" I asked, making my voice tremble just a little. Preston put a hand on my shoulder. It took everything in me not to recoil. "It is just a little prick, Kamara," he said, his voice dripping with fake brotherly concern. "Don't worry, Dr. Thorne is the best. He will take good care of you." Thorne nodded. "Indeed. Why don't you step behind the screen and change into this gown? Leave your purse and belongings on the chair." I stood up, clutching my designer handbag. It was a limited edition Hermes. But what was inside was far more valuable. Tucked into the side pocket, hidden inside a tube of lipstick, was a high-fidelity listening device. It was military-grade technology, the kind I used when negotiating hostile takeovers. It could pick up a whisper from across the room. I walked behind the changing screen. I made a show of being clumsy, dropping my bag onto the chair so it fell open slightly. "Oops," I called out. "Sorry, I am just so nervous." "Leave it," Dr. Thorne said impatiently. "Just change." I undressed slowly, my mind racing. I needed them to talk. I needed them to think I was out of earshot. "Dr. Thorne," I called out from behind the screen. "I think I need to use the restroom before we start. My nerves are getting the best of me." "The restroom is down the hall to the left," Thorne sighed. "Hurry up, we are on a schedule." I stepped out from behind the screen, still wearing my dress. I left my bag on the chair right where I had dropped it. The lipstick recorder was positioned perfectly facing the desk. "I will be right back," I whispered, keeping my head down. I walked out of the office and closed the heavy door. I counted to 3. Then I leaned against the wall just a few feet away. I did not go to the restroom. I pulled out my phone and opened the app that connected to the recorder. I put one earbud in and pressed listen. The audio was crystal clear. "Is she gone?" Preston asked, his voice changing instantly from caring to demanding. "She is down the hall," Thorne replied, the sound of a drawer opening and closing. "Look, Preston, I ran the blood work from the sample you stole from her old medical files. She is a match. A perfect match, actually. Her liver is pristine." "I knew it," Preston said. I could hear the greed in his voice. "So we can operate tomorrow?" Thorne hesitated. "Technically, yes. But there is a problem. I can see it in her eyes, Preston. She is not going to sign the consent forms. She is playing along now because of the pressure, but when push comes to shove, she is going to walk. She is smart, I can tell." Preston laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "She doesn't have to sign the consent forms, Harrison. That is why I brought you the paperwork this morning." Paper rustled on the recording. "This is a medical power of attorney," Thorne said slowly, "and a petition for involuntary commitment." "Exactly," Preston said. "Listen to me closely. When she comes back in here, I want you to give her a sedative. Tell her it is a vitamin shot or something for anxiety. Make it strong." "And then?" Thorne asked. "And then, when she is out cold, we sign the papers," Preston explained. "I will testify that she had a psychotic break, that she was threatening to harm herself." You are a doctor. You will agree. We get emergency guardianship declared. We say she consented to the surgery before she lost her mind, but we need to operate immediately to save Jasmine. Thorne was silent for a moment. Preston, this is highly illegal. If she wakes up and sues, she won't wake up until Jasmine has her liver. Preston cut him off. And by then, who is going to believe a woman who was just committed to a psych ward? She has a history of drug abuse, remember. Her father will back us up. The whole church will back us up. We just need the organ, Harrison. You owe me $50,000. Do you want me to call in that debt? Or do you want to do the surgery? There was a long pause. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my face remained calm. I was listening to them plot to mutilate me, to drug me and steal a part of my body, like I was nothing more than spare parts. Fine, Thorne said finally. I have the sedative ready. Midazolam. It will knock her out in 5 minutes and she won't remember a thing. Get her back in here. Excellent, Preston said. I will go get her. I pulled the earbud out and shoved it into my pocket. I pushed myself off the wall. I did not run. I did not scream. I walked calmly back toward the office door, just as Preston opened it. He almost bumped into me. Ah, there you are, he said, smiling that sick, predatory smile. We were just worrying about you. I looked at him. I looked at the man who was planning to drug me and cut me open. And I smiled back. It was the best acting performance of my life. I am ready now, I said softly. I walked back into the room. Dr. Thorne was holding a syringe. Just something to help you relax, Kamara, he said, his eyes shifting away from mine. Just a little vitamin B complex. I walked over to the chair and picked up my bag. I slipped the strap over my shoulder. Actually, Dr. Thorne, I said, checking my watch, I think I'm going to skip the vitamins. I have a sudden headache. I think I will just go home and rest. We can do the test tomorrow. Preston's face darkened. No. We do this now. Sit down, Kamara. I took a step back toward the door. My hand was inside my bag, gripping a small canister of pepper spray just in case. I said no, Preston, and you know how stubborn I can be. I turned and walked out. Kamara, get back here, Preston shouted. I didn't stop. I walked briskly down the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble. I heard footsteps behind me, but I walked through the automatic doors and into the bright sunlight before they could grab me. My driver was waiting at the curb. I slid into the back of the black SUV and locked the door. Go, I told the driver. Back to the hotel. As the car pulled away, I watched Preston burst out of the hospital doors, red-faced and furious. He looked around wildly, but I was already gone. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app again. I pressed play. I will testify that she had a psychotic break. We just need the organ. You owe me $50,000. The voices filled the quiet cabin of the luxury car. It was damning. It was irrefutable. It was the end of Dr. Harrison Thorne's medical career. And it was a felony charge for Preston Vance. Conspiracy to commit bodily harm, kidnapping, medical fraud. I leaned back in the leather seat. Most people would be shaking. Most people would be crying after hearing their own brother-in-law plot to drug and butcher them. But I was not most people. I was the storm they had invited back home. I looked out the window at the passing city of Atlanta. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I am not going to give this tape to the police yet, I whispered to the empty air. Not yet. I am going to save it for the party. I tapped the screen and forwarded the audio file to Sterling, my lawyer, with a simple subject line. Checkmate. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 a.m., but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. I was sitting at the small vanity desk in the guest room, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the darkness. On the screen was a dossier my team in New York had just sent over. It contained tax returns, bank statements, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs that proved my mother, Betty Sterling, was not just a victim of my father's bullying. She was an active participant in his fraud. I heard the floorboards creak outside my door. It was a distinctive sound, the third plank from the left, I knew that creak better than I knew my own heartbeat. It was the sound of my mother checking on us when we were children, or more accurately, checking on Jasmine. The doorknob turned slowly. The door creaked open, slicing a wedge of yellow hallway light across the room. My mother stood there. She was wearing her old floral bathrobe, the one she had worn for 20 years. In her hand, she held a mug of steaming hot chocolate. It was a weaponized nostalgia. She knew hot chocolate was my comfort drink when I was 10 years old. She was bringing a childhood memory to a war zone. "May I come in, Kamara?" she asked, her voice soft and trembling. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the laptop screen, watching the numbers that proved she had signed off on the withdrawal of $20,000 from the church charity fund. "You are already inside, Betty," I said coldly. She stepped in and closed the door softly behind her. She placed the mug on the nightstand. The smell of cheap cocoa powder filled the air, clashing with the expensive perfume I wore as armor. "I couldn't sleep," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I was worrying about you. You looked so tired at the hospital today, and then running off like that. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." I spun my chair around to face her. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the lines of worry and bitterness etched around her mouth. She looked small, harmless, but I knew better. "I am fine," I said. "What do you want, Mother?" Betty sighed, clasping her hands in her lap. She looked down at her fingers, avoiding my gaze. "I brought the papers," she whispered. She reached into the deep pocket of her robe and pulled out a folded document. It was the consent form for the liver transplant, the one Dr. Thorne and Preston had tried to drug me into signing. "We don't have time for games anymore, Kamara," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Jasmine is getting worse. She needs to be prepped for surgery by tomorrow morning." I looked at the papers, then up at her face. "So, you are asking me to cut myself open," I said. "You are asking me to risk my life, for her." "It is not a risk," Betty insisted, leaning forward. "It is a procedure. You are strong, Kamara. You have always been the strong one. You are built like an ox, just like your grandfather. You can take it." I flinched internally. Built like an ox. That was her code for ugly, for masculine, for unlovable. "But Jasmine," she continued, her eyes misting over with performative tears. "Jasmine is delicate. She is like a flower. She wasn't made for suffering. She needs to be whole, Kamara. She has a husband. She has a reputation. She is the face of this family." I sat very still. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. "So because she is pretty, she deserves my liver?" I asked, my voice flat. Betty waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. It is not about pretty. It is about roles. God gave everyone a role. He gave Jasmine the light. He gave her the charm, the grace, the ability to make people feel good. That is her gift. And he gave you—" She paused, struggling to find a compliment that wasn't an insult. "He gave you resilience," she finished. "He gave you a thick skin. You don't need people to look at you the way they look at Jasmine. You are fine being alone. You are fine in the shadows. That is why this makes sense. You give her what she needs to shine, and you go back to your life. You won't even miss a piece of your liver. You are too tough to miss it." I felt a crack in my chest, a deep hairline fracture in the wall I had built around my heart. Even after all these years, part of me had still hoped that she had closed the curtains that night because she was scared, not because she didn't care. I stood up and walked over to her. I loomed over her, sitting on the bed. "Mother," I said quietly, "look at me." She looked up, her eyes darting nervously. "Do you love me?" I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Betty blinked. "Of course I love you. You are my daughter." "Do you love me?" I repeated louder. "Or do you just tolerate me? Do you love me, or do you love the fact that I might be useful to your golden child?" Betty's mouth tightened. She stood up, facing me. Her softness evaporated. "Why do you always have to make everything so difficult, Kamara?" she snapped. "This is why your father gets so angry. You always want to talk about feelings. You always want to dig up the past. Answer the question," I said. Fine, Betty hissed. You want the truth. Here is the truth. I love peace, Kamara. I love a quiet house. I love a Sunday dinner where no one is fighting. I love a reputation that is clean. She took a step closer, poking a finger into my chest. And you are not peace. You are a storm. You have been a storm since the day you were born. You are loud. You are opinionated. You are difficult. Every time you walk into a room, I have to hold my breath, waiting for disaster. Jasmine brings me joy. You bring me headaches. So no, I don't love the way you make me feel. But if you sign this paper, if you save her, if you save this family from embarrassment, then maybe I can finally look at you without wishing you were someone else. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. She didn't love me. She loved her comfort. And my existence was uncomfortable for her. I nodded slowly. The crack in my heart didn't break me. It calcified. It turned into diamond. Hard. Unbreakable. Cold. Okay, I whispered. Betty's eyes widened. Okay. You mean, you will do it? I walked over to my desk. I picked up a pen. Yes, I said. You are right. I am the strong one. I am the one who handles the hard things, so I will give you what you want. I will give you peace. Betty clapped her hands together, a look of pure relief washing over her face. Oh, thank God. Oh, Kamara, thank you. You are doing the right thing. Finally. She practically ran to the bed, grabbed the consent form, and smoothed it out on the nightstand. Sign right here, she said, pointing to the bottom line. Just sign and we can wake up from this nightmare. I walked over to the nightstand. I looked at the medical form. Then I reached into the drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a different document. It was a single sheet of stiff legal paper stamped with the seal of the Georgia State Court. I placed my document on top of hers. I signed it with a flourish. My signature was sharp aggressive. Betty frowned, looking at the paper. What is this? This isn't the consent form. No, I said, capping the pen. It isn't. I picked up the paper and handed it to her. That is a subpoena, Mother. Betty took the paper, her hands shaking. A what? A subpoena. I explained, my voice devoid of any emotion. You see, I agreed with you. You said you love peace. You said you want a quiet life where no one fights. I walked to the door and opened it wide. That document summons you to testify in federal court regarding the embezzlement of the church charity funds. It also names you as a co-conspirator in the fraud case against Otis Sterling. Betty dropped the paper. Her face went gray. You can't do this. I am your mother. I smiled. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. I know. And as your daughter, I am giving you exactly what you asked for. Prison is very quiet, Mother. You will have a lot of peace there. No storms, no difficult daughters, just 4 walls and silence. Betty started to hyperventilate. She reached out to grab me, but I stepped back into the hallway. Good night, Mother, I said. Don't drink the cocoa. It has gone cold. I slammed the door in her face. I heard her scream my name, but I didn't stop. I walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom where my father was sleeping. I had one more signature to collect before the sun came up. And the storm was just getting started. The backyard of my childhood home had been transformed into a stage for the greatest con game in Atlanta history. Preston had spared no expense using money he definitely did not have. A massive white silk tent stretched across the lawn, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that hung from the support beams. Round tables were draped in velvet, and the air smelled of imported orchids and desperation. He called it the Gift of Life Gala. It was supposed to be a solemn fundraiser to cover the medical expenses for Jasmine life-saving surgery. In reality, it was a cash grab designed to squeeze the last few drops of sympathy from the local elite before the inevitable bankruptcy filing became public knowledge. I watched from the shadows of the patio for a moment before making my entrance. Inside the tent, the cream of Atlanta society mingled. There were city council members, real estate tycoons, and the entire deacon board of my father's church. They were sipping champagne and writing checks, believing they were buying a stairway to heaven. In the center of it all sat Jasmine. She was the star of the show. They had positioned her wheelchair on a raised platform like a throne. She was wearing a pale white gown that made her look like a tragic bride or a sacrificial lamb. A heavy wool blanket was draped over her legs, despite the warm evening air, to emphasize her frailty. She looked pale and beautiful, and utterly helpless. Every few minutes she would cough delicately into a lace handkerchief, and a fresh wave of pity would ripple through the crowd. Standing beside her was Preston, playing the role of the devastated but strong husband. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist. He held a microphone in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. "My wife is a fighter," Preston announced, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. "She is fighting for every breath. But the medical bills are overwhelming. The insurance companies have turned their backs on us. That is why we need you. We need our community." A murmur of sympathy went through the tent. I saw a woman in diamonds wipe a tear from her eye and reach for her checkbook. It was disgusting. It was brilliant. And it was about to end. I stepped out of the shadows. I had spent the last 2 hours preparing for this moment. I was not the servant girl in the black shift dress anymore. I was not the scared teenager in the snow. I was wearing Versace. The dress was a deep crimson silk, the color of fresh blood. It was strapless, fitted perfectly to my body with a slit that ran up to my thigh, showing off my strong legs. It was a dress that screamed power. It was a dress that demanded attention. Around my neck hung a necklace of cascading diamonds that glittered like ice under the chandeliers. It was worth $500,000 more than the entire mortgage of this house. I walked onto the grass. The sound of my heels sinking slightly into the turf was lost under the music of the string quartet. But my presence was not lost. It started as a ripple. The guests near the entrance stopped talking. They turned to look. Then the people next to them turned. Like a wave crashing against the shore, silence swept through the tent. The string quartet trailed off. The clinking of glasses stopped. All eyes were on the woman in the red dress walking through the sea of black and white tuxedos. I kept my head high, my expression cool and unreadable. I walked straight down the center aisle toward the stage. The crowd parted for me instinctively, sensing that I was not someone to be blocked. I saw my father Otis drop a canapé mid-bite. His jaw went slack. Beside him, my mother Betty looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed his arm for support, her eyes wide with terror. They didn't recognize me at first. I looked too expensive, too confident. But then the realization hit them, and the fear in their eyes was delicious. On the stage, Preston froze. He lowered the microphone. Jasmine sat up straighter in her wheelchair, her miraculous frailty forgotten for a second as she glared at me with pure jealousy. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I stood with my hands on my hips, posing like I was on a runway in Milan. I let them look. I let them see the diamonds. I let them see the glowing skin. I let them see the woman who had survived their winter. Preston recovered first. Anger flashed across his face, replacing the sorrowful husband act. He handed the microphone to a waiter and stormed down the steps of the stage. He marched toward me, his face red. He stopped inches from me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. But I was wearing 4-inch stilettos. We were eye to eye. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so the donors wouldn't hear. I smiled. It was a bright, dangerous smile. "I am attending the party, Preston," I said, my voice smooth as velvet. "It is a fundraiser, isn't it? I thought I would stop by and see what my family is selling today." Preston grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug into my skin, but I didn't flinch. "You are making a scene," he whispered furiously. "Look at you. You look like a harlot, wearing red to a charity event. Have you no shame?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Take your hand off me, Preston," I said. "This silk is imported. Your sweaty palms are going to stain it." He released me as if burned, But he didn't back down. He looked me up and down, sneering at the necklace. "Who did you borrow those from?" he mocked. "Or did you rent them? Is that what you did, Kamara? You spent your last dime renting a costume to try and upstage your dying sister." He laughed a cruel short sound. "You look ridiculous," he continued. "Everyone here knows you are broke. Everyone knows you are the black sheep. Go back to the kitchen before you embarrass yourself. I bet that dress has a return tag still on it. Try not to spill any punch on it. You can't afford the cleaning bill." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, loud and clear, ringing through the silent tent. It confused him. It confused everyone. "Oh, Preston," I said, shaking my head. "You really don't check the news, do you? You have been so busy playing the victim you forgot to watch the market." I reached into my matching red clutch. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a business card. It was thick, heavy cardstock with gold embossing. I handed it to him. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. "Read it," I said. He squinted at the card in the dim light. "Apex Event Management," he read aloud. "So what? You got a job as a party planner. Congratulations. Now go get me a drink." "No, Preston," I said, stepping closer, my voice projecting so the people in the front row could hear. "I didn't get a job. I acquired the asset." I gestured to the waiters circulating with champagne trays. I gestured to the string quartet. I gestured to the massive tent above our heads. "I bought Apex Event Management 15 minutes ago," I announced. The wire transfer cleared while I was in the car. Preston's mouth fell open. He looked around wildly as if expecting the tent to collapse. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I am talking about ownership, Preston," I said. "I own the catering company. I own the rental company that provided this tent. I own the staging company that built that platform your wife is sitting on." I took a step forward, forcing him to take a step back. "So, technically, Preston, this is my party. These are my waiters. That is my champagne you are drinking. And judging by the ledger I reviewed before the purchase, you haven't paid the deposit yet." A gasp went through the crowd. I heard whispers breaking out like wildfire. "You are lying," Preston shouted, his voice rising in panic. "You don't have that kind of money." I signaled to the head waiter, a man named Charles, who had been looking at Preston with disdain all evening. Charles nodded at me respectfully. "Ms. Sterling," Charles said loudly, "shall I cut off the bar service? The account is currently in arrears." Preston turned pale. He looked at Charles, then back at me. The reality was sinking in. The black sheep wasn't just back. She was the shepherd, and she was about to lead them all to the slaughter. I smiled at Preston one last time. "No, Charles, keep the champagne flowing," I said. I looked past Preston directly at Jasmine, who was gripping the arms of her wheelchair so hard her knuckles were white. "Let them drink," I said. "They are going to need something to wash down the truth I am about to serve." I walked past Preston, brushing his shoulder with mine. I headed straight for the stage. I was not going to the kitchen. I was going to the microphone. And the party was just getting started. The wooden steps of the stage felt solid beneath my feet. Every step was a declaration of war. I reached the podium and gripped the cold metal of the microphone stand. The feedback squealed for a split second, a sharp, high-pitched sound that made the wealthy guests in the front row flinch. But no one looked away. They were captivated. They were watching the woman in the blood-red dress who had just claimed to own the very ground they stood on. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw curiosity. I saw judgment. And in the eyes of my family, I saw pure, unadulterated terror. Preston was still standing at the foot of the stairs, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jasmine was gripping the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly I thought they might snap. But it was my father, Otis, who moved first. He charged up the stairs from the side entrance. His face was a mask of furious desperation. He moved faster than I had seen him move in years, fueled by the panic of losing his grip on the narrative. He reached the podium and grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my flesh, painful and possessive. "Get down!" he hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "Get down right now before I drag you down. You are drunk. You are making a fool of yourself." I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I leaned into the microphone so my voice boomed across the silent garden. "I am perfectly sober, Father, and I think the only fool here is the man trying to silence the owner of the venue." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Otis flinched as if I had slapped him. He tried to cover the microphone with his hand, forcing a strained smile toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted over me, sweat beading on his forehead, "please forgive my daughter. As I mentioned, she has had a hard life. She is clearly having an episode. The stress of her sister's illness has been too much for her fragile mind." He pulled at me again, trying to physically force me away from the podium. "Security!" he yelled, looking around wildly. "Charles, get her off the stage." Charles, the head waiter standing by the champagne tower, crossed his arms and did not move. He looked at Otis with a cold, professional indifference. He knew who signed his paycheck now. Otis' face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He realized he had lost control of the staff. He realized he was alone. "I am your father!" Otis roared, abandoning the microphone and screaming directly in my face. "You will obey me. Get off this stage and go to your room, or so help me God, I will." He raised his hand. It was a reflex, a muscle memory from my childhood. He was about to strike me in front of 200 of Atlanta's most powerful citizens. I didn't flinch. I dared him with my eyes. "Do it," I thought. "Hit me. Let them see who you really are." But before his hand could fall, a sound cut through the tension like a knife. It was not a scream. It was not a shout. It was the heavy, authoritative thud of a car door slamming shut, followed by a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the tent. Heads turned toward the main entrance of the garden. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide path down the center aisle. It was the kind of deference usually reserved for royalty or something far more dangerous. Walking down that path was a woman. She was in her 60s, but she moved with the energy of a predator. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was tailored to perfection. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She carried a cane not because she needed it, but because it looked like a scepter. It was Judge Olivia Sterling, the most feared federal judge in the state of Georgia, the woman who had sent senators to prison, the woman whose gavel sounded like thunder. Otis' hand froze in midair. His anger evaporated, replaced instantly by a sycophantic fear. He lowered his hand and smoothed his jacket. "Judge Sterling," he stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "What? What an honor! We didn't expect you. Please come up. We have a seat for you in the VIP section." Otis thought she was a donor. He thought she was here to write a check. He was already calculating how much money he could get from her. Judge Sterling did not look at him. She did not look at the crowd. Her steel-gray eyes were locked on me. She walked straight to the stage, climbing the stairs with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The clicking of her cane on the wood echoed in the silence. She stopped next to me. She looked at Otis, who was practically bowing. "Deacon Otis," she said. Her voice was low and raspy, a voice that commanded absolute attention. Judge Otis said, sweating profusely. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" "I am not here for pleasure," Judge Sterling said, "and I am certainly not here for this charade you call a fundraiser." Otis' smile faltered. I don't understand." Judge Sterling turned to face the audience. She placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a warm, protective weight. It was the touch of a mother. "I am here because I heard there was a family gathering," she announced, "and I wanted to support my daughter." Confusion rippled through the crowd. People looked at Jasmine in her wheelchair, then back at the judge. They whispered to each other, "Daughter, but Jasmine is right there. What does she mean?" Otis looked confused, too. He chuckled nervously. "I think there is a misunderstanding, Judge. Jasmine is my daughter. She is the one who needs help." Judge Sterling turned her head slowly to look at Otis. Her expression was one of utter contempt. "I am not talking about Jasmine," she said. She tightened her grip on my shoulder, pulling me slightly closer. "I am talking about Kamara." Otis blinked. He looked at me, then back at the judge. His brain could not process the information. "Kamara?" He laughed, a short, breathless sound. "Kamara is… well, she is Kamara. She is my daughter." "No," Judge Sterling said. Her voice was like a gavel strike. "She was your daughter, Otis, until the night you threw her out into a blizzard like a bag of garbage." A collective gasp went through the tent. It was louder this time. Shocked, horrified. Otis' face went pale. He took a step back. You know about that," he whispered. "I know everything," Judge Sterling said, stepping toward him. "I know because I am the one who found her. I am the one who scraped her off the pavement when she was half frozen. I am the one who sat by her hospital bed while she shivered and cried for a mother who never came." She gestured to me. "I adopted her, Otis. I gave her my name. I gave her the education you denied her. I gave her the love you were too selfish to provide. She is Kamara Sterling, and she is my daughter in every way that matters." Otis looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at me with new eyes. He finally understood why I was rich. He finally understood the power behind my threats. He wasn't dealing with a runaway. He was dealing with the heir to the Sterling dynasty. But that is impossible," Otis stammered, trying to salvage his pride. "Blood is blood. I am her father. The Bible says—" "Do not quote the Bible to me, Otis." Judge Sterling cut him off. "You forfeited your title of father 17 years ago. You don't get to claim her now just because she is successful. You don't get to harvest her organs to fix the mistakes of your favorite child." She turned back to the microphone, addressing the stunned crowd. "This man claims this is a fundraiser for a sick woman, but I am a federal judge. I deal in evidence, and I think it is time you all saw the evidence of what this family really is." Otis lunged forward. "No, stop, you can't do this." I stepped in front of Judge Sterling, blocking him. I looked him in the eye. "Sit down, Otis," I said. He stopped. He looked at the judge. He looked at the crowd. He looked at me. And he saw that he had already lost. He collapsed onto a chair on the stage, putting his head in his hands. I turned to the projectionist booth at the back of the tent where my team had taken control. "Roll the tape," I commanded. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. And as the first image appeared, the image of a teenage girl shivering in the snow, the silence in the garden broke. The storm had finally arrived. The massive LED screen behind me illuminated the night sky like a second moon. It cast a harsh, unforgiving white light over the garden, exposing every wrinkle of fear on my father's face and every bead of sweat rolling down Preston's neck. The string quartet had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped pouring. The silence was so heavy it felt like it could crush bones. I gripped the microphone. My hand was steady. My voice was calm. I was not screaming. I did not need to scream when I had the truth on a 60-foot screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice echoing through the terrified hush. "My father told you that I was a drug dealer. He told you that I was the black sheep who abandoned her family. He told you that my sister Jasmine is a saint who is dying of a tragic autoimmune disease." I pointed the remote control at the screen. The image changed. It was no longer a photo of me shivering in the snow. It was a bank statement. A very detailed, very recent bank statement from the First National Bank of Atlanta. But I am a businesswoman. I continued walking slowly across the stage. And in business we follow the money. This is the account for the Starlight Church Charity Fund. The fund that you all have been donating to for the past 5 years. The fund that was supposed to feed the homeless and repair the church roof. I pressed the button again. Portions of the statement zoomed in, highlighted in red. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, looking directly at the elderly woman in the front row who was clutching her pearls. "You donated $10,000 last month for the soup kitchen. Here is where your money went." On the screen, the transaction line read, Liquor World Fine Spirits $2,000. Below that, the Velvet Lounge 5 IP Room $5,000. Gasps erupted from the crowd like small explosions. And Mr. Henderson, I said, turning to a wealthy car dealership owner, you gave $50,000 for Jasmine medical treatments. You thought you were paying for dialysis. You thought you were paying for specialists. I clicked the remote. A new document appeared. It was a Venmo transaction history linked to the church account. You were actually paying for this. The screen showed a series of transfers to a user named Tyrell the Stallion. The memos were not for medical services. They were emojis. A heart. A flame. A wink. Who is Tyrell? Someone whispered loudly. I answered the whisper. Tyrell is a 22-year-old personal trainer, I said, my eyes locking onto Jasmine, who was shaking violently in her wheelchair. And according to the private investigator report I received this morning, he is currently living in a condo in Buckhead. A condo paid for by the church emergency fund. Otis stood up, his legs wobbly. That is a lie, he shouted, his voice cracking. That is a fabrication. You hacked the bank. I ignored him. I pressed the button again. The bank statements vanished. In their place, a handwritten page appeared. The handwriting was looped and childish with little hearts dotting the I's. It was unmistakable. Everyone in the church knew that handwriting. It was Jasmine handwriting. She wrote the church bulletin every Sunday. This is a page from Jasmine Diary, I announced. My team recovered it from the trash can behind the house this morning along with the empty vodka bottles. I turned to read the screen, my voice projecting clear and sharp. October 14th, 2007. Dear Diary, I almost got caught today. Mom found the stash in my purse. She was going to tell Dad. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. So I took Kamara backpack. I wrapped the stuff in a gym sock and shoved it deep in the bottom pocket. I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked at my father. He was staring at the screen, reading the confession of his golden child. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. I continued reading. When the police came, I cried. I cried so hard they believed me. Dad was so angry at Kamara. He threw her out in the snow. I felt bad for a second watching her freeze on the porch. But then I realized it was better her than me. Dad would never forgive a drug addict, but he can forgive a victim. Goodbye, Kamara. Thanks for taking the fall. The silence in the tent was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. Otis fell back into his chair. He looked at Jasmine. For 17 years, he had hated me. He had cursed my name. He had treated me like a criminal. And the real criminal had been sleeping down the hall, eating at his table and spending his money. You knew, Otis whispered, his voice barely audible. You knew. Jasmine did not look at him. She was staring at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. I walked back to the center of the stage. So here we are, I said, addressing the crowd. You came to save a dying woman. But Jasmine is not dying of a disease. Her liver is failing because she has spent the last 10 years drinking your donations and partying with her boyfriend while her husband looked the other way. I looked at Preston. He was staring at his shoes, defeated. And tonight, I continued. Tonight they wanted to cut me open. They wanted to take a piece of my body to fix the damage she did to herself. They wanted to harvest me like a crop because they believe I am worth less than she is, because I am the black sheep and she is the angel. I gestured to the woman in the wheelchair, the woman wrapped in blankets, the woman who had played the victim for a lifetime. But look closely, I said. Look at the miracle of modern medicine. I clicked the remote one last time. A video began to play. It was grainy night vision footage from a security camera. It showed the back patio of the house just 2 hours ago. It showed Jasmine standing up from her wheelchair. It showed her walking to the outdoor bar. It showed her pouring a drink and dancing a little jig as she laughed with Preston. "She is walking," someone shouted. "She can walk," another voice cried out in anger. The crowd began to surge forward. The pity had evaporated, replaced by the fury of people who had been swindled. Jasmine looked at the screen. She saw herself dancing. She saw her lie exposed naked to the world. Something inside her snapped. The mask of the fragile invalid crumbled. She let out a scream that sounded more like an animal than a human. "You bitch!" she shrieked. And then the miracle happened. Jasmine threw the heavy wool blanket off her legs. She didn't struggle to stand. She didn't need help. She leaped out of that wheelchair with the agility of a cat. She ran. She ran across the stage, her white gown flying behind her, her face twisted into a mask of demonic rage. She was fast. She was strong. She was definitely not dying. She charged at me, her hands curved into claws reaching for my throat. "Turn it off!" she screamed, saliva flying from her mouth. "Turn it off, you jealous lying witch!" I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let her come. I let everyone see her run. I let everyone see the strength in her legs and the violence in her eyes. She reached me, grabbing the microphone stand, trying to swing it at my head. Otis stood up, horrified. "Jasmine, stop." But she didn't stop. She was fueled by the adrenaline of total exposure. "I hate you," she screamed, tearing at my dress. "I hate you. You ruin everything. You always ruin everything." I caught her wrist. I held it firm. I looked her in the eye, calm amidst her chaos. The crowd gasped. They weren't looking at a sick woman anymore. They were looking at a fraud. I leaned into the microphone one last time as she struggled against my grip. "Praise the Lord," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "It is a miracle. She is healed." The security guards dragged Jasmine off the stage, her heels leaving gouges in the wooden floorboards. She was still screaming threats, but they were empty noise now. The crowd watched her go with a mixture of horror and fascination. The angel of the church had fallen, and she had hit the ground with the grace of a rabid dog. I stood alone at the podium. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I smoothed the red silk of my dress. I was not done. I looked down at Preston. He was standing near the champagne tower, his face the color of old ash. He was trying to signal to Charles, the waiter, to let him out the side exit, but Charles was staring straight ahead, ignoring him completely. "Preston," I said into the microphone. My voice was soft, almost intimate, but the massive speakers carried it to every corner of the garden. "Do not leave yet. We haven't gotten to the main event." Preston froze. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. He knew what was coming. He remembered the hospital. He remembered the bag I had left on the chair. I turned back to the audience. "You have seen the fraud," I said. "You have seen how my sister and her husband stole your money to fund their lifestyle. But theft is a white-collar crime. It is clean. It is paperwork." I paused, letting the tension build. "What I am about to show you is not clean. It is visceral. It is violent. And it is the reason I'm standing here tonight, instead of lying in a hospital bed in a medically induced coma." I pressed the button on the remote. The screen behind me went black. There were no pictures this time, just a sound wave visualization, a green line cutting across the darkness. "Yesterday, my loving brother-in-law took me to St. Jude Medical Center," I explained. "He told me it was for a checkup. But thanks to a device I planted in the room, I know what the real plan was." I hit play. The audio boomed through the tent crystal clear. "Just give her a sedative." Dr. Thorne's voice echoed, distorted but undeniable. "Midazolam. It will knock her out in 5 minutes." Then Preston's voice cut in sharp and impatient. "And then when she is out cold, we sign the papers. I will testify that she had a psychotic break. We get emergency guardianship declared. She won't wake up until Jasmine has her liver." The gasp from the crowd was different this time. It wasn't shock. It was revulsion. This was conspiracy to commit bodily harm. This was butchery. I let the tape play to the end. I let them hear Preston bargaining with the doctor. I let them hear him say he would rather risk prison than lose his lifestyle. When the audio ended, the silence was deafening. I looked at Preston. He was trembling so violently that the champagne glass in his hand slipped. It shattered on the patio stones, a sharp punctuation mark to his destruction. "That is not me!" Preston screamed suddenly, finding his voice. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "That is fake. That is AI. She used a computer to fake my voice. I never said that. I didn't have to answer him." From the back of the tent where the shadows were deepest, movement caught the corner of my eye. Judge Sterling stood up. She tapped her cane on the floor once. It was a signal. Suddenly, the perimeter of the tent was flooded with blue lights. Not party lights, police lights. Uniformed officers swarmed into the garden from every entrance. They moved with military precision. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dress uniform. It was Chief of Police Marcus Henderson. Preston Vance, seeing the uniforms, tried to run. He shoved a waiter aside, knocking a tray of hors d'oeuvres into the grass. He made a break for the side gate, scrambling over the white picket fence, like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. He didn't make it 5 feet. 2 officers tackled him into the perfectly manicured hydrangeas. "Get off me," Preston howled, as they wrenched his arms behind his back. "Do you know who I am?" Chief Henderson walked over to where Preston was pinned face down in the dirt. He signaled for his men to haul him up. Preston stood there, his tuxedo-torn dirt smeared across his sweating face. He looked at the chief, and his eyes bulged with entitlement. "I am a Vance Preston," shouted spitting grass from his mouth. "My father plays golf with the governor. You cannot arrest me. I demand to speak to your superior." Chief Henderson looked at Preston with an expression of calm boredom. He adjusted his hat slowly. "I am the superior son," the chief said, his voice deep and resonant. Preston's face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. He looked around at the crowd looking for an ally. But the donors, the deacons, the socialites, they were all looking at him like he was a disease. "This is a mistake," Preston yelled, struggling against the cuffs. "This is a setup. That woman framed me. I am white. You can't just take my word against hers." The air in the tent seemed to drop 10 degrees. The racial slur hung in the air, unspoken but clearly implied. Preston was playing his final card, the card of privilege. Chief Henderson stepped closer to Preston. The chief was a black man who had served on the force for 30 years. He had seen everything. And he was not impressed. "Mr. Vance," the chief said quietly, so only Preston in the front row could hear. "In this county, we do not care about who your father knows. And we certainly do not care about the color of your skin. We care about evidence. And right now the evidence says you conspired to drug and mutilate a woman for financial gain." The chief nodded to his officers. "Get him out of here. Read him his rights," assuming he shuts up long enough to hear them. "No," Preston screamed as they dragged him away. "No, this isn't happening. Otis, help me. Otis, tell them." But Otis did not help him. My father was standing near the stage exit, pressed against the dark curtain, trying to make himself invisible. He had watched his daughter run away. He had watched his son-in-law get arrested. And now he was watching his own life disintegrate. He saw Preston being shoved into a squad car, the blue lights flashing against the white tent. He saw the guests beginning to whisper, pointing fingers in his direction. Otis turned slowly, trying to slip through the gap in the curtains. He wanted to run back to the house, back to his office, back to a bottle of whiskey where he could pretend none of this was real. He took one step into the darkness. "Not so fast, Otis," I said into the microphone. My voice stopped him dead in his tracks. It was like a lasso tightening around his neck. Otis froze. He didn't turn around. His shoulders hunched up as if waiting for a blow. I stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for me again. I walked slowly toward him, my red dress flowing around me like liquid fire. I reached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched violently. "Where are you going, Dad?" I asked, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "The party isn't over, and we have so much to discuss." Otis turned around slowly. His face was gray. His eyes were hollow. "Kamara, please," he whispered. "Not here. Not in front of the church. I smiled. Especially in front of the church, I said. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. Preston is going to prison for assault. Jasmine is going to face fraud charges for the charity money. But you, Otis, you are the head of this house. You are the captain of this ship. I pointed toward the looming silhouette of the mansion behind us, the house where he had kicked me out, the house where he had erased my face from the photos. We need to talk about the house, I said. Otis blinked confusion clouding his fear. The house. What about it? It belongs to me. I laughed softly. Oh, Daddy, you really should have read Grandma Will more carefully. I took his arm and steered him back toward the light, back toward the judging eyes of the crowd. Let go inside. I have one more document to show you, and trust me, this one is going to hurt more than the handcuffs. The party was over. The blue lights of the police cruisers flashed rhythmically against the living room curtains, casting long strobe-like shadows across the Persian rug. Outside, the last of the wealthy guests were hurrying to their cars, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disaster. Preston was gone, taken away in the back of a squad car. Jasmine was sitting on the velvet sofa, sobbing into her hands, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked like a melted candle. My mother Betty sat beside her, staring blankly at the wall, as if her mind had simply shut down. But my father Otis was pacing. He walked back and forth in front of the fireplace like a caged tiger. His tuxedo was unbuttoned, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving with a mixture of panic and rage. He stopped suddenly and pointed a trembling finger at me. I was standing by the window, holding a glass of water, watching the police lights fade into the distance. "Get out!" Otis roared, his voice cracked, breaking the silence of the room. "Get out of my house!" he screamed again, stepping closer. "You have done your damage. You have ruined your sister life. You have sent your brother-in-law to jail. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied, you little witch?" I turned slowly to face him. I took a sip of water, cool and refreshing. "I am very satisfied, Otis," I said calmly. "Justice is a satisfying meal." "Justice," Otis spat. "You call this justice? You humiliated us. You destroyed the reputation I spent 40 years building. And now you are standing in my living room drinking my water like you own the place. Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I set the glass down on the side table. I picked up my clutch, the red leather matching my dress. "Trespassing," I repeated, testing the word. "That is an interesting choice of words, Father. Because according to the law, you can only trespass on property that does not belong to you." "It belongs to me," Otis shouted, pounding his fist on the mantelpiece. "I built this life. I paid the mortgage. This is my house, my kingdom, and you are banished from it." I sighed. It was a long, weary sound. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the final document. It was old. The paper was yellowed and fragile, protected by a clear plastic sleeve. It smelled of lavender and old cedar. It was the smell of my grandmother Rose. "Do you recognize this, Otis?" I asked, holding it up. Otis squinted at it. His eyes widened. He recognized the seal. "That is your mother, Will," he said dismissively. "That is ancient history. She left the house to me. I am her only son." I shook my head. "No, Otis. You really should have read the fine print. Grandma Rose never trusted you. She knew you had a gambling problem even back then. She knew you would gamble away her legacy, if given the chance." I walked over to the lamp and held the document under the light so he could see the faded typewriter ink. "Grandma set up a living trust," I explained. "You were never the owner, Otis. You were the trustee. You were just the caretaker allowed to live here as long as you maintained the property and the family name." I pointed to paragraph 4. "The ownership of the estate was set to transfer to the next generation upon the youngest grandchild turning 18, I read aloud. "That was 10 years ago." Otis laughed, a nervous, jerky sound. "Exactly," he said. "And since Jasmine is the oldest and I am the trustee, I decided to keep it in my name to protect her." Besides, the will says it goes to the grandchild of upstanding moral character. He pointed at Jasmine, who was still crying on the couch. Jasmine is a leader in the church. She is a wife. She is a mother. You were a drug dealer. You were kicked out. You disqualified yourself the night you left. I smiled. This was the moment I had been waiting for. That is the funny thing about evidence. Otis, I said, it changes things. I walked over to the coffee table and placed the yellowed will next to the diary page I had shown on the big screen. The will specifically states that the inheritance goes to the granddaughter who has not brought shame upon the family name through criminal acts or deception, I quoted from memory. I looked at Jasmine. Jasmine confessed in her own handwriting to possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, I said. She confessed to framing a minor. And tonight, the whole world saw proof that she has been committing charity fraud for 5 years. I turned back to Otis. And you, Otis, you knew? You covered it up. You breached your fiduciary duty as a trustee. Otis' face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. He backed away from me until he hit the wall, so I continued taking a step toward him. By the terms of Rose Sterling will, Jasmine is disqualified. You are removed as trustee, and the entire estate, the house, the land, the 10 acres of prime real estate automatically transfers to the remaining beneficiary. I tapped my chest lightly. Me. Otis shook his head violently. No, that is not possible. You can't just take my house. I have lived here for 30 years. I am a deacon. You are a squatter, I corrected him, my voice sharp as a razor. You have been living in my house for 10 years rent-free. You have been letting it rot. You have been selling off the furniture. You have been digging a hole of debt so deep you can't see the sky. I pulled out my phone and opened an email attachment. I held the screen up to his face. This is the deed, Otis. It was recorded at the county courthouse at 9 a.m. this morning. It has my name on it. Kamara Sterling, sole owner. Betty looked up from the couch. Her voice was barely a whisper. So you are kicking us out. Just like we kicked you out. I looked at my mother. I thought about the snow. I thought about the cold. I thought about the 15-year-old girl who banged on that door begging for warmth. No, Mother, I said softly. I am not kicking you out like you kicked me out. That would be cruel. Relief washed over Betty's face. She sat up straighter. Oh, thank you, Kamara. I knew you had a heart. I knew you wouldn't leave us homeless. We can make this work. We can fix up the guest room for you. I laughed. I laughed so hard I almost choked. You misunderstand me, I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. I am not kicking you out like you kicked me out, because I am giving you warning. You gave me 0 minutes. I am giving you 8 hours. Otis pushed himself off the wall. 8 hours? What are you talking about? I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtains. I pointed to the darkness beyond the driveway where heavy machinery was already idling on the flatbed trucks, waiting for the sun to rise. You see, Otis? I have no interest in living in this house, I explained, turning back to face the room. It smells like lies. It smells like mold. And quite frankly, it has bad feng shui. I checked my Patek Philippe watch. So at 10 a.m. this morning, right after the deed was transferred to my name, I executed a sale agreement. Sale? Otis gasped. You sold the house. To who? Who would buy this place in 1 day? I smiled a predator smile. Walmart, I said. The silence in the room was absolute. Jasmine stopped crying. Betty's mouth fell open. Walmart. Otis whispered. Yes, I continued. Apparently they have been trying to rezone this area for a supercenter for years, but the Historical Society kept blocking them. But since I am the owner, and I have friends on the city council, we managed to push through an emergency demolition permit. They need a parking lot, Otis. A big one. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the night air rush in. The bulldozers start at 8 a.m. sharp, I said. They are going to flatten this house. They are going to flatten the garden. They are going to flatten the gazebo where you hold your tea parties. By noon tomorrow, the Sterling family legacy will be a pile of rubble destined for a landfill. I looked at my family one last time. So if I were you, I would start packing. You can take whatever fits in your car. Everything else belongs to the pavement. Otis fell to his knees. He didn't pray. He just wept. He wept for his house. He wept for his pride. He wept because he realized that the stone the builder refused had not just become the head cornerstone. It had become the wrecking ball. I walked out onto the porch. My heels clicked on the wood. "Tick-tock, Otis," I called back over my shoulder. 7 hours and 59 minutes left. The blue lights of the police cruisers were the only illumination left in the living room, spinning rhythmically across the walls like a strobe light in a nightmare. The silence that followed the chaos was heavy and suffocating. Preston was gone. My father was broken, kneeling on the floor. And then there was Jasmine. For 35 years, Jasmine had been the sun around which this family orbited. She was the beauty queen, the saint, the fragile flower that needed to be protected at all costs. But as I looked at her now, huddled on the velvet sofa, she did not look like a queen. She looked like a ruin. Her white gown was torn at the hem from where she had tried to run. Her hair, which had been perfectly coiffed, was now a tangled mess sticking to her tear-stained cheeks. She was shaking not from cold and not from fear, but from the violent withdrawal that was beginning to claw at her system now that the adrenaline was fading. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wild. She looked around the room, realizing for the first time that her audience was gone. The donors were gone. Her husband was gone. Her protection was gone. "You did this," she hissed. Her voice was hoarse, a rasping sound that lacked its usual manipulative sweetness. "You planned this whole thing. You came back just to destroy me." I stood by the fireplace watching her with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. "I didn't destroy you, Jasmine," I said calmly. "I just turned on the lights. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided to trade your dignity for a bottle of vodka and a lie." Jasmine laughed, a high-pitched manic sound. She stood up, swaying unsteadily on her feet. She walked toward the liquor cabinet, her hands reaching out automatically for a drink. "You don't know anything," she spat. "You don't know what it is like to be me. The pressure, the expectations, everyone always looking at me expecting perfection. I needed a release. I needed something to take the edge off." She grabbed a crystal decanter of whiskey, but before she could pour it, I stepped forward and knocked it from her hand. The crystal shattered on the hardwood floor, splashing amber liquid over her expensive shoes. "No more," I said. "The bar is closed, Jasmine, and frankly, you can't afford the tab." Jasmine stared at the broken glass, then up at me with pure hatred. "I don't need your permission," she screamed. "I have my own money. I have the charity fund." I shook my head slowly. "You have nothing," I corrected her. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, holding it up so she could see. "While you were busy running across the stage, my team sent the evidence of your fraud to the bank," I explained. "Your accounts are frozen, Jasmine. Every single one of them. The church fund, your joint account with Preston. Even that secret savings account you thought no one knew about. It is all locked down pending a federal investigation." Jasmine's face went white. She patted her dress, looking for her phone. She pulled it out and started tapping frantically. "I will call Tyrell," she muttered, her fingers flying across the screen. "He loves me. He has money. We will go to Miami. We will start over." I watched her dial. I watched her wait. I watched the call go straight to voicemail. She dialed again and again. "He is not going to answer, Jasmine," I said softly. She looked up, panic rising in her chest. "Why? What did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "Tyrell watched the live stream. He saw you get exposed. He saw Preston get arrested. And being a smart young man with a survival instinct, He realized that his sugar mama was now a liability. I took a step closer. My private investigator tells me Tyrell cleared out his condo an hour ago, I continued. He took the TV, he took the jewelry you bought him, and he took his car. He is gone, Jasmine. And he blocked your number. The phone slipped from Jasmine's fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. She looked around the room, realizing she was truly trapped. No husband, no lover, no money, no parents to bail her out. She looked at Otis, who was still staring catatonically at the floor. "Daddy," she whimpered. "Daddy, do something. She is lying. Fix it." Otis didn't move. He didn't even blink. He was mourning the loss of his house, and for the first time in his life he could not hear her. Jasmine turned back to me. The anger in her eyes dissolved, replaced by a desperate, pathetic cunning. She smoothed her hair. She forced a smile onto her face, a grotesque parody of her pageant smile. "Kamara," she said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. "Look, I know we have had our differences. I know I wasn't the best sister. But we are blood. We are family." I crossed my arms, waiting. "You are rich," she continued, taking a step toward me. "I saw your dress. I saw that necklace. You have millions. You own companies. This is just a game to you, isn't it? You proved your point. You won. Congratulations." She fell to her knees in front of me. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my red dress. "Please, Kamara," she begged. "Just help me out. I need to get out of town before the police come back with a warrant for me. I need a fresh start." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Just give me $10,000, she whispered. "That is nothing to you. It is like pocket change, just 10,000. I will disappear. I will go to California. You will never see me again. I promise. Just give me a chance to survive." I looked down at her. The golden child, the girl who had everything I ever wanted, the girl who had watched me freeze on the porch and felt nothing. Now she was on her knees begging for scraps. It would be so easy to write her a check. It would be so easy to make her go away. But I was not here to make things easy. I was here to make things right. I reached into my clutch. Jasmine's eyes lit up. She saw the movement. She thought she had won. She thought that deep down I was still the desperate little sister seeking approval. "Oh, thank you," she breathed. "Thank you, Kamara. I knew you loved me." I opened my wallet. I bypassed the black credit card. I bypassed the stack of $100 bills. My fingers closed around a single crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out. I dropped it. It fluttered through the air, slowly drifting down until it landed on the floor right in front of Jasmine's knees. It was a $5 bill. Jasmine stared at it. She looked up at me, confusion warring with insult on her face. $5, she whispered. "What is this?" I looked her dead in the eye. "It is a bus ticket, Jasmine," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "There is a free rehab center 3 towns over," I continued. "It is state-funded. They take people with no insurance and no money. They will help you detox from the alcohol. They will help you get clean." Jasmine, jaw dropped. You want me to go to a homeless shelter?" "I am Jasmine Sterling. I am a lady. You are a criminal and an addict," I said, cutting her off. "And right now, that $5 is the only asset you have in the world." I turned my head toward the front door, where 2 large uniformed officers had just appeared. They had returned with a warrant. Not for the house. For her. "Officers," I called out, pointing at the woman on the floor. "She is all yours." Jasmine scrambled back, crabbing across the floor, away from the police. "No," she screamed. "No, you can't take me. Kamara, give me the money. Give me the money, you witch." The officers grabbed her. 1 on each arm, they hauled her up. She kicked and screamed, thrashing like a wild animal. Her shoe flew off, hitting the wall. "I hate you," she shrieked as they dragged her toward the door. "I hate you. I hope you die. You stole my life." I watched her go. I watched the sister who had pushed me out into the cold be dragged out into the night. I looked down at the floor. The $5 bill was still there, lying amidst the broken glass and spilled whiskey. She forgot her inheritance, I said to the empty room. I turned to my father, who finally looked up, his eyes hollow and haunted. Well, Otis, I said, smoothing my dress, it looks like you are the only one left, and the clock is ticking. You have 7 hours to pack. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. 3 a.m. 5 hours until the bulldozers arrived. The house that had stood for 40 years as a monument to my father ego was now nothing more than a collection of cardboard boxes and frantic movement. I stood in the doorway of the living room, leaning against the frame. I was still wearing my red Versace dress. It was the only splash of color in a room that was rapidly turning gray and empty. My mother Betty was on her knees, wrapping porcelain figurines in old newspaper. Her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped a ceramic shepherd boy. It shattered on the floor. She didn't even flinch. She just swept the pieces into a pile and kept packing. She was in shock. She was packing as if she were going on a vacation, not being evicted into homelessness. "Kamara," she whispered without looking up. "Where are we going to go? The Motel 6 is full." I checked on my phone. I reached into my purse and pulled out a voucher. "I booked you a room at the extended stay on the highway," I said. "It is paid for 1 week. After that, you are on your own." Betty took the voucher, her eyes filling with tears. 1 week. "But Kamara, it will take months to find a new house. Your father credit is, well, you know." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew Otis' credit score was lower than the temperature outside the night he kicked me out. Speaking of Otis, my father stormed into the room carrying a stack of framed certificates, his Deacon of the Year awards, his community leader plaques. He was stripping the walls of his glory, leaving behind the square outlines of dust where his pride used to hang. He saw me standing there and stopped. His face was a map of exhaustion and fury. He dropped the heavy frames into a box with a loud crash, cracking the glass on several of them. "Are you enjoying this?" he snarled. "Are you enjoying watching your old man crawl?" I took a sip of water from the bottle I had brought from the catering tent. "I am not watching you crawl, Otis," I said calmly. "I am watching you pack. There is a difference." He kicked the box. It slid across the floor, hitting the sofa. "You are ungrateful," he shouted, his voice rising to that pulpit boom he used to scare sinners. "I gave you life. I put food on your table for 15 years. I gave you a roof over your head. And then you took it away," I reminded him. "You took the roof away when I needed it most." "That was discipline," Otis yelled, taking a step toward me. "A father has a duty to discipline his child. I was trying to save your soul. And this is how you repay me, by stealing my inheritance, by humiliating me in front of the whole town." He stopped in front of me, breathing heavily. The smell of stale sweat and old whiskey radiated off him. He tried to soften his face to summon the charm that had fooled his congregation for decades. "Kamara, look at me," he said, lowering his voice. "I am your father. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Blood is thicker than water, baby girl. Even after everything, I am the man who held you when you were born. You can't just destroy me. You can't leave me with nothing." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had erased my face from the family photos. I looked at the man who had chosen his reputation over my life. I felt a twinge of something in my chest, but it wasn't guilt. It was pity. He truly believed that biology gave him a free pass for abuse. I set my water bottle down. I stood up straight, towering over him in my heels. "You are right, Otis," I said. "You are my father. Biology confirms that." His shoulders sagged with relief. He thought he had cracked me. He thought the guilt trip had worked. But I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "You are also something else." I reached into the pocket of my clutch and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and turned it around so he could see. It was an email. The subject line read, "Urgent forensic audit results." The recipient list included every single member of the Board of Deacons and the regional bishop. "What is this?" Otis asked, squinting at the small screen. "I sent this 5 minutes ago," I explained. Otis read the first line. His face went white, whiter than the paper his awards were printed on. "You see, Otis," I said, taking a step closer, "when I bought the debt on this house, I also ran a background check on your finances. I wanted to see how a man on a deacon's salary could afford a Mercedes for his son and a renovation for his kitchen." Otis started to shake. "No, you didn't." "I found the second set of books, Otis," I said. "The ones you keep in the safe in your study. The ones that show the transfers from the building fund to your personal checking account." I swiped the screen showing a spreadsheet. $300,000 over 10 years, I recited. "You stole from the widows. You stole from the orphans. You stole from the very people who trusted you to lead them to God." Otis fell back against the wall. He looked like he was having a heart attack. "You sent this to the board?" he whispered. I nodded. "I sent it to everyone, Otis. The board, the bishop, the IRS." Otis let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "My pension," he gasped. "My position. They will strip me of my title. They will excommunicate me. They will do more than that," I said. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain again. Outside, the darkness of the driveway was suddenly illuminated by a familiar, flashing blue light. But this time, it wasn't just one car, it was three. Otis looked out the window. He saw the uniforms. He saw the handcuffs glinting in the moonlight. "No," he moaned, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor amidst the boxes of his broken trophies. "Not me. They can't take me. I am a man of God." "You were a man of God," I corrected him. "Now you are just a felon." I looked down at him. "You tried to use the Bible to control me, Otis. You love to quote the scripture about honoring your father and mother. But you forgot the other one." I leaned down close to his ear. "Be sure your sin will find you out." The front door burst open. The police didn't knock this time. They didn't need to. I had given them the key code. "Deacon Otis Sterling," a voice boomed from the hallway. It was Chief Henderson again. Otis looked up at me one last time. His eyes were begging. "Help me, Kamara. Please. I am an old man. I will die in prison." I looked at him. I thought about the 15-year-old girl freezing in the snow. I thought about how she almost died because of his pride. "Then you should have packed warmer clothes," I said. I turned my back on him as the officers swarmed into the room. I walked over to my mother, who was frozen with a porcelain angel in her hand. "Come on, Betty," I said, grabbing her arm. "Grab your purse. The taxi is waiting. You don't want to be here when they put the cuffs on him." My mother dropped the angel. It didn't break. It just rolled across the floor, coming to rest against Otis' shoe as the police hauled him to his feet. I walked my mother out the back door, leaving my father to face the judgment he had preached about for 40 years. The sirens wailed in the night, a mournful song for a kingdom that had finally fallen. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the vacant lot where the Sterling family manor once stood. It had been exactly 7 days since the party. 7 days since I dropped the match and watched everything burn. Now the air smelled of turned earth and crushed drywall. The bulldozers had done their work with efficient brutality. There were no walls left to hide secrets, no basement to lock away unwanted children, just a flat expanse of red Georgia clay ready to be paved over. I stood by the chain-link fence wearing a white trench coat and sunglasses. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't want the dust to get in my eyes. A black town car idled behind me, the engine purring softly. My lawyer and adoptive mother, Judge Sterling, sat in the back seat waiting. But I needed this moment. I needed to see the emptiness. It is strange how small a kingdom looks when it has been leveled. For 17 years, this plot of land had loomed in my nightmares like a fortress. It was the place where I was judged, the place where I was discarded, Now it was just dirt. In a few months, it would be a parking lot for Walmart shoppers. People would park their sedans right where my father used to preach his sermons of hypocrisy. They would load groceries right where Jasmine used to practice her pageant walks. Life has a funny way of correcting itself. I took a deep breath, inhaling the clean air. For the first time in my life, the air in Atlanta didn't feel heavy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a news alert. Local socialite denied bail, the headline read. I swiped to see the photo. It was Preston. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his complexion. The article detailed his arraignment hearing this morning. The judge had looked at the evidence, the audio recordings, the financial records, and the testimony of Dr. Thorne, who had turned state witness to save his own skin. 10 years. That was the sentence on the table for conspiracy to commit bodily harm and medical fraud. Preston Vance, the man who bragged about his father golf buddies, was going to spend the next decade in a cell with men who didn't care about his last name. He had traded his country club membership for a prison yard, all because he was too greedy to pay his own debts. I deleted the alert. He was yesterday news. I thought about Otis and Betty. They weren't in the news. They didn't warrant a headline. Their punishment was far quieter and far more enduring. My private investigator had sent me photos of their new reality. They were living in a subsidized motel room on the edge of town near the interstate. It was one room with 2 twin beds and a kitchenette that smelled of stale grease. The church board had moved swiftly. Once the forensic audit went public, the bishop had no choice. Otis was stripped of his deaconship. He was excommunicated. The community that had worshipped him now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah. A man without a title, without a home, and without an audience. Betty was finally living the life of peace she claimed she wanted. No one visited them, no one called. She had her quiet. But I imagined the silence in that motel room was deafening, filled only with the sound of Otis muttering about his lost glory. And Jasmine. The last I heard, she had checked into the state-run rehab facility, using the $5 I gave her for the bus fare. She was alone. No husband, no lover, no parents to enable her. For the first time in her life, she would have to face the morning without a safety net. Whether she sank or swam was no longer my concern. I had cut the rope. Kamara. I turned around. Judge Sterling had rolled down the window of the car. The pilot says we need to leave soon if we want to beat the weather, she said, her voice warm and steady. I looked back at the empty lot one last time. I felt for a lingering sense of sadness or guilt. I waited for the little girl inside me to cry out for her father, but there was nothing, just a profound sense of lightness. The debt was paid. The ledger was closed. I am coming, I said. I walked to the car, my heels clicking on the asphalt. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but ghosts and gravel. I slid into the leather seat of the car. The interior smelled of expensive leather and freedom. Did you find what you were looking for? Judge Sterling asked as the car pulled away. I took off my sunglasses and looked at the woman who had saved me. The woman who had taught me that family is an action, not just a bloodline. Yes, I said, smiling. I found the exit. The car merged onto the highway, speeding toward the private airfield where my jet was waiting. I was going back to Chicago, back to my penthouse, back to my empire. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I looked out the window as the Atlanta skyline faded into the distance. People always tell victims to forgive. They say it is the only way to heal. They say you have to be the bigger person. But they are wrong. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like a demolition crew. Sometimes it looks like standing up and saying, I am worth more than this. My father used to tell me I was a disaster waiting to happen. He used to say I was a dark cloud hanging over his perfect family. I took a sip of water and watched the clouds gathering in the sky above the jet. They say after the storm comes the sun. But for me, I was the storm. And now my sky is finally clear. This story teaches us that sharing DNA does not give anyone the license to abuse you. True family is built on respect, love, and protection, not on manipulation and biology. Kamara Journey reminds us that our worth is not defined by the people who rejected us. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is to cut ties with the toxicity that holds us back. You do not owe your abusers your body, your money, or your forgiveness. You only owe yourself the chance to live a life that is free, happy, and authentically yours. If this story ignited a fire in your soul, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength today. And tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to be the storm to clear your own sky? I read every single story. Until next time, keep building your empire.